Recording in progress.
Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Mengying Zhang will defend the academic thesis, The Hidden Face, Improving Face Matching and Face Recognition of Mass Perpetrators. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Highly esteemed opponents, pro-rector, supervisors, dear colleagues, friends, and family, thank you all for joining me today, either in person or virtually, for the defense of my thesis titled The Hidden Face, Improving Face Matching and Face Recognition of Mass Perpetrators. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the widespread use of masks makes face recognition significantly difficult, especially in security and law enforcement settings. However, this challenge still remains, as many perpetrators cover their facial features to avoid being recognized. Here is an example of a masked suspect captured by camera. In real life, we can see from the figure that this suspect was heavily covered, only with the eye visible. So, imagine you were a witness and the police come to you to ask you to recognize this suspect. Should the police show you the full face photo of possible suspect, or should the police show you the eyes region, the similar parts as you saw in CCTV footage? This is the key question of my research, and in the next 15 minutes, I will introduce the concept of contextual congruency and explain how it helps in improving masked face recognition performance. So, what is contextual congruency? It refers to the degree of correspondence between the two faces within a pair, or between the encoding and the retrieval faces. Here is an example. If we just encoded a masked face, and then we recognize a masked face, as people perceive two faces in a similar way, we call it congruent condition. However, if we just encoded a masked face, but recognize a full face at retrieval, as people saying when the viewing condition has changed, we call it incongruent condition. And the previous studies have found that people performed better in congruent condition than incongruent condition. So we call it congruency effect. So why does congruency effect happen here? One explanation comes from transfer appropriate processing. It suggests that recognition performance improves when the way of the face is processed during the encoding phase matches how it is processed at retrieval. It just explained why congruency matters in memory-based tasks. However, if the task doesn't involve any memory, such compare two faces directly, the theory doesn't apply. So, to understand why congruency helps in matching tasks, we need to know how to process faces and how we just to process faces when the faces were partially occluded. It is widely accepted that faces are processed holistically, that we perceive faces as an integrated whole, which contains the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and their spatial relationships. However, if a face was disrupted by a mask, that's not all facial feature visible. In such condition, applying holistic processing later might make it even harder for people to recognize the faces, as not all facial feature for them to recognize, to recognize. And in such condition, applying feature-based processing seems to be a potential way for them to perceive masked targets, as the feature-based processing forces people to focus on the specific facial features. Therefore, feature-based processing explains why congruency matters in masked face recognition. In previous studies, many research have found that masks can impair both matching and recognition performance. However, most of these studies use the surgical mask that cover the lower half of the face, leaving still large parts of the facial feature visible. However, in real-life scenarios, that most perpetrators, they will cover almost entire of their faces, only leaving limited facial feature visible. In such condition, it brings great challenge for people to recognize them, and it is also unclear whether the congruency effect observed in previous studies can still hold under limited facial feature visibility. To fill this gap, I aim to explore the robustness of the congruency effect under limited facial feature conditions. And also, I aim to explore the boundary conditions of the congruency effect, such as, especially under the suboptimal conditions, such as low quality, such as the images are in low quality or different viewing angles. To achieve this aim, I conducted a series of face matching and face recognition experiments, moving from ideal to suboptimal conditions. Each addresses two key questions. One is about how congruency affects performance. Another is how congruency affects metacognition, such as confidence. In this presentation, I will focus on how, the robustness and the boundary condition of the congruency effect in mask face recognition performance, and covering the experiment 1, 3, 6, and 8. Across all experiments, I have 4 facial conditions. For the congruence conditions, that people perceive faces in a similar way, such as both full face or both mask face. However, in incongruent conditions, the viewing condition has changed. For example, if that people encoded a full face but retrieved a partial face. This design allows us to compare 4 facial conditions directly and examine the advantage of feature-based processing and the congruency effect. The first thing I did was to ask participants to compare 2 faces directly and to determine whether these 2 faces are the same person or different people. The example shown on the screen was a congruent mask condition where a mask face was paired with a partial face. The bar graph on the right shows the results for the accuracy for congruent condition and incongruent condition. The yellow bar represents congruent condition, and the green bar represents congruent condition, and the yellow bar represents incongruent condition. And the accuracy was significantly higher for congruent condition than incongruent condition, which showed a strong congruency effect. And to investigate the advantage of feature-based processing in matching mask target, I compared the mask partial condition and the mask full condition. The blue bar represents mask partial condition, and the pink bar represents mask full condition. And the mask partial condition was significantly higher, higher than mask full condition, which showed an advantage of feature-based processing, that when people just seeing a mask target paired with a partial face rather than full face can benefit people. Unlike the face matching task, face recognition task not only involves perceiving faces, but also retrieve faces from memory. They still demand added complexity, as memory might affect performance. So in this study, and it also raises the concerns about whether the congruency effect observed in previous matching task can still hold in recognition task. Here is the result. We still found the congruency effect in recognition task, and we also found the advantage of feature-based processing in recognition task, as when people just encoding a mask face recognize a partial face rather than full face can help them to improve recognition performance. In addition to the robustness of congruency effect, I also explored the boundary condition of the congruency effect. I explore whether the congruency effect can still hold under suboptimal real-world conditions, as when faces are shown in low-quality images or different angles. And the result shown on the right, we still found the congruency effect, although this effect size was much smaller than in previous controlled conditions. And lastly, I explored whether the congruency effect in static images can extend it to the dynamic realistic scenarios. So I used the video to photo matching task. In this task, I asked participants to match either masked or full face video target with either the full or partial face photo. However, no congruency effect was found in this task. The performance remained consistently low across all conditions. So just make a summary of the congruency effect. I found the congruency effect in both matching and recognition tasks under controlled condition, with the highest effect size in matching task. Also, when we just moved it to the realistic suboptimal condition, such as showing the dynamic video or the low quality images, the congruency effect become weaker or disappear. Based on the findings I had, I conclude that the contextual congruency can enhance both matching and recognition performance under controlled condition. However, this congruency effect can be challenged under the realistic scenarios. And also, feature-based processing seems to be a potential way for people to process masked targets. My research is not only of academic interest, but also has practical implications. For example, it informed training programs by helping officers to focus on the specific features that when they just identify the masked target. And also, it can help border control and the surveillance team enhance matching protocols by refining face matching tasks, especially when the faces are partially occluded. Also, it helps raise public awareness in the context of awareness, especially in the challenge of recognizing the masked target, especially in the context of crime prevention and investigation. In short, my study offers better understanding of how people just perceive masked target and provide a way to improve face matching and face recognition of masked perpetrators. Thank you for your listening. Hereby, I will give the word back to Pro-Rector.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. And we will now start with the opposition. And the opposition will be opened by Professor Utka. He is a professor of legal psychology at this university. Professor Utka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear candidate, thank you for this very interesting presentation. Also beautiful slides, beautiful, very interesting, thanks. Well, of course, I read your thesis, and it covers a topic I think of high interest for the field of psychology and law. And I'm deeply impressed by all the different types of studies that you conducted to examine this congruency effect and also using this feature-based processing in the area of face matching and face recognition. I also really like that you have very fundamental methodology, but also try to extend it to more ecologically valid designs. And you found some support actually for the congruency effect. And as you demonstrated, when you resort to more ecologically valid designs, the effects become less strong or perhaps even disappear. So, of course, I'm here to ask questions, so this was just some token of appreciation. I'm oftentimes drawn to this, I think, but maybe I'm wrong, this rather famous quote. It's by a social psychologist, Kurt Lewin, and he once stated, "There's nothing more practical than a good theory." So my questions are specifically focused on the practical relevance of your research, combined with the theories that you mentioned in your thesis. So, in your thesis, you attempted to increase the ecological validity, but still, I think that one important limitation of your work is that it's still far from what happens in real life. And I think an essential ingredient that you often see, perhaps in real crimes, is the time or delay between an experienced event and, for example, face recognition. There's a time in between. So, more concretely, in many cases, witnesses will not be immediately confronted with, for example, a face recognition task after experiencing a crime. But this can happen after days, hours, weeks, sometimes even. And actually, there's a lot of memory research on how memory behaves or acts over time. I think one of the most famous demonstrations is the forgetting curve. And also there's a lot of research showing how memory behaves over time for details and for the gist of events. And I think that's of interest for your thesis because you specifically examined this feature-based processing. So I checked the literature actually a bit on time effects, delay effects, on face recognition, and rather surprisingly, the literature is very limited, and especially virtually no literature concerning masked perpetrators. So my first question is, if you would study time effects in this area of research, what kind of time interval would be interesting to examine? Would it be a day? Would it be a week based on transfer-appropriate processing theories? And if you would use a time delay, if you would make it more ecologically valid, what would you expect in terms of face recognition for masked perpetrators? Would you still find this congruency effect? If yes, why? If no, also why? And perhaps try to use your transfer-appropriate processing theories in your answer. These are my questions. I have other questions, but depending on time, I will see if I will ask them.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. It's really an important thing, and also I need to consider about the time. In my face recognition task, because I just do it online, they are not with some like they spend over 1 day or few weeks and then they need to test it again. So it's really a good point for me and to think about it. And it is true that the time interval there will be like influence the memory performance, because I already know in previous like the memory task for full face, there have some like the study they have shown that the time pleasure or some time and the interval to, for example, like the for 200 interval or over the 200 to the different interval, but not to over 1 day, this delay. And it will be interesting to explore this in the future, but I need to answer your question about if the congruency effect in this can still hold if the time delay, right? If I understand correctly. Yeah. In my opinion, because I don't know if any other study that explored the time interval in the mask face recognition. In my opinion, I think the congruency effect can also work in this time interval. The reason why, because that the congruency effect, it refers to that the correspondence between the two faces and that's how people just perceive faces. And if they just like the retrieval face, just the same presentation, not presentation, the same way as it's showed as the encoding. So I think it can improve their performance, not without like the faces have extremely just changed. For example, that when you just encoded a suspect that's without like the beard or something, and for a few weeks ago, and they just do the beard without a beard, and then the faces are changed, and the viewing condition maybe they also have the full face, but some appearance has changed. So that makes it will be affect their performance. But for the masked face, we just focus on the feature-based processing. For example, like only to see their eyes, and the eyes has already to play an important role in recognizing faces. So just we think that the congruency effect based on the feature-based processing can also help them to recognize this mask face, even the time interval to be long. So I hope this can explain your question.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
because you are the chair of the assessment committee.
Thank you. Well, I think if that would be the case, I think that would be really interesting if that congruency effect would still hold over time. That would be a really beautiful demonstration. How does your hypothesis hold against research showing that our memory for details, and I would say eyes are maybe details of a face, so that our memory for details, they fade over time more than perhaps the overall meaning, gist, structure, theme of an event. How could you reconcile these?
If I understand correctly, you just asked how I just to say the time window to be the different and the congruency effect still works for them, right?
Yeah, and especially so you expect that over time you would still see the congruency effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry. I want to answer that if I have hypothesis for this, I think that the congruency effect can be, for example, for the different time window, like the for duration different, and the effect size for the congruency effect will become different, especially the time to be the longer that they need to recognize for the face. And the congruency effect will be smaller, effect size will be smaller than with, for example, like in our study. I think the effect size will be much smaller than in this one,
Okay.
or when they just recognizing the mask target.
I'm happy for, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Satisfied?
Yeah, satisfied. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Then we will proceed with the opposition, and the next opponent will be Professor Vredeveld, and she is here from all the way from Amsterdam. She's chair of legal psychology at the Free University of Amsterdam.
Thank
Professor
you.
Vredeveld.
Thanks. Dear candidates, I'd like to compliment you on a very well-written thesis. I really enjoyed reading it, and I was particularly impressed by the solid design, execution, and analysis of the experiments, the many experiments. You very clearly explained how the findings relate to real-world phenomena, although I did find that the ecological validity of the experiments were sometimes left something to be desired. But I have a question about that maybe later. My first question is about something else. So in your general introduction, you write and provide a clear overview of the literature on face processing. On page 6, you write, "It is widely accepted that faces are processed holistically." And on page 8, "Holistic processing is a hallmark of face perception." I'm sure most memory researchers would agree with those statements. However, I would like you to critically reflect on the body of research providing evidence for this. There are other phenomena in psychology that were once widely accepted and universal. For example, Brown wrote in 1986 about the self-serving bias that it is an urge so deeply human we can hardly imagine its absence. However, when the same research was conducted in East Asia, that self-serving bias was not observed. It turned out that this bias was not so deeply human after all, but deeply Western. So this question has two parts. I'll first ask the first part and let you answer. The first part is, can you reflect on the extent to which the literature on holistic face processing is based on only a rather weird subset of the world population? Weird meaning Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies. So Western Europe, North America. Are you aware of studies replicating the holistic processing of faces in different populations? And do you believe it would replicate across the world? Is this indeed a universally human phenomenon, or could it be culturally specific?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. First, I want to repeat your question to make it correct, if I understand correct. First thing is that you want me to explain the extent theory about the holistic processing in like the Western countries or like some like Caucasian faces processing?
So to what extent is that assumption that we all process faces holistically true, or to what extent is it just based on Western processing of faces? How would it work in the rest of the world?
I need to answer this because the holistic processing, usually I know in the own race, they will to process their faces by holistically because they can just to integrate their faces as a whole. However, in my just limited knowledge, I know that if the Asian participants, they just to processing their faces just to their own group, they will use holistic processing. But if they just to process any other group, they will use the feature-based processing, especially for to focus on the eyes region. And also, I know there have some research has found that the Caucasian participants, like the Western countries, they are really good at the feature-based processing, especially when the faces was masked. And I read the literature about the masked face, and recently there's one study. They have found that they used the black participant and the white participant to recognize, to matching the masked faces. And they found that the black participants are not really just like they didn't differ in recognizing like the own race or other race. But for the Caucasian faces, Caucasian participants, they are really affected a lot by the mask. And they just conclude that because the Caucasian are more rely on the feature-based processing, so the holistic processing just disrupted by the mask maybe just means a lot for them. So I hope I just answered your question well.
Yes, thank you. If I could just follow up with the second part of the question.
Yeah, of course.
So in your discussion on page 170, you suggest that future research could explore how contextual congruency interacts with race differences in face processing, especially in the recognition of masked faces. However, you do not explain what sort of race differences in face processing you mean, nor how you would expect race or cultural differences to influence the congruency effect. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more of what you would expect for your own studies if you did the experiments in different countries with different races, which races, and what would you expect in terms of the congruency effect?
Thank you for your question. It's really inspiring because I really think about what I need to do for the next, because when I just come to the Netherlands, there are a lot of like the Caucasian faces, and because I'm Asian, and also it will be interesting if I just to explore the difference between the group for the Asian and the difference like the race group. And based on the findings in mine and also others for the own race bears some parts of this, I truly have some hypotheses about this. For example, if the people just like encoding the masked faces, I hypothesize like the Asian, they will not really good at to recognizing the masked face, but don't blame me because this was my opinion. Yeah, and also if the Caucasian, because just based on the other studies they're funding, they just found that Caucasian are really good at the feature-based processing. And in my study, I suggest that the feature-based processing is really a good way, like the potential way, if the face was disrupted by a mask. So I hypothesize that there have the race difference. Group difference, and the Asian, just like the congruency effect, will be smaller, much smaller than in Caucasian face group. And also, I think that for Asian, if they just to encoding the mask face and full face, although both of the groups will affected by the masks, and the mask will impair their performance, but Asian will be less affected by the mask because they just to use the holistic processing. No matter it was a mask still there or without there, they just to use their own like the processing strategy, like the feature-based, like the holistic processing to process faces. So I think if my studies like the funding apply to this race group, I think it will be like effect size, congruency effect size will be much bigger for Caucasians, not for Asian. Yeah.
Thank you.
Then we will proceed with the third opponent, and that is Professor Laura Mergaert. And she is she has also a chair in legal psychology at KU Leuven.
Thank you, dear candidate. First of all, I want to tell you that I found it a really interesting topic that was very timely at the moment the research was initiated, obviously, because of the pandemic, but with a relevance obviously going way beyond the pandemic, given that offenders might use face masking, which has a not to underestimating impact on solving crimes. So I really enjoyed reading it, and your thesis was, in my opinion, well elaborated upon and well balanced, especially regarding the experiments. And it was a pleasure to read it, and I was really also impressed by the numbers of experiments you conducted. In that sense, I also truly appreciated that you kept an eye on the ecological validity and practical relevance of your topic, and that you try to take that into account when designing your study. I still, however, do see some challenges for the practical implementation of your findings, and I also see some room for further thought. And I would want to ask something more about that, if you allow me. The first thing I would really want to ask you is regarding the accuracy of those masked face recognitions, because your thesis also shows it's quite hard to do an accurate recognition. And so I was wondering to what extent masked face recognitions should be allowed to be taken into account as evidence in court. Are such recognitions actually good enough to be used in court? Should we accept that? And if so, under what conditions? Do you see some balanced answer there, maybe that under some conditions it's possible? And what guidelines in that case would you give to judges for evaluating such evidence and for evaluating the accuracy of such mass face recognitions? I'm curious of your opinion on that.
For your question, if I understand correctly, you just to question about the chapter 4 about the accuracy is not so high. So if the court can take it into consideration as evidence too, right? So I thank you for your question. It's really meaningful because it's just based on the for the practical implication. And I need to say that the accuracy in chapter 4 is just near the chance level. It just shows that it's really not too as high as in previous chapters, like in the controlled condition. But it means that the task is difficult, especially when the stimuli are in real life conditions. So it's just emphasized that if the people just recognize the faces in real life scenarios or any other like unstrained condition, and it will make them to perform worse than in controlled condition, especially in lab-based condition. So I need to say that if the court can take it into evidence, but it cannot to rely on this one finding, because our finding just to be the first step for them to like provide a way to improve the mask face recognition performance. And for the future, maybe they can just combine with like AI stuff, something just to combine together, not to only focus on our study, because we can know that the human decision, there will have some like the mistake, and also the accuracy is not so high. So if the place or can't take it as evidence, maybe there will be dangerous for them, and we need to be cautious about this. And also, I need to say that this study is not the only way for people to know that the mask face, because I knew there have some like the technique stuff also use like the AI decision to recognize the mask target. Maybe for the future study or in the like police, that part, and they can just combine the academic findings and together with application. So combine together machine and with human decision, that can make the double check for them to use. I hope it's.
Okay, thank you for your answer. If I'm allowed, I would want to ask another question about the practical implementation, and it's about something you highlighted in your presentation as well, and it's about the training for law enforcement and security agencies. you suggested that it would be good to train them to focus on face features instead of holistic processing, to make the training as realistic as possible. I have a question about that. How would you try to do that? What would this training look like? And how would you try to do it in such a way that when those people have to do a recognition of a masked face outside of the training in real life, that they would actually be improved in their recognition? And so I think it would also be important to make sure the memory load is as realistic as possible in the training, for instance. So have you some thoughts about that? That would be my final question. Thank you.
Question. About the training for like training programs for focusing on the specific facial features, there have some like the literatures about the diagnostic training, and also recently one study of Cacture. I'm not sure if the person is correct, but he just published his paper also based on the diagnostic training on mask face recognition, and he just to ask participants just focus on the ears and also for the face marks, and they found that if they just introduce participants to focusing on these features, and their like the performance can got improved about 5%. In their study. So for my study, because we also suggest that people can rely on the feature-based processing in recognizing the marked target. So if we just suggest that like the officers to use the feature-based processing, maybe also to use like the similar pattern with the diagnostic, or for example, like give their introduction to focus on these features when they just see a mask face, or later just provide to memorize the features and to try to let them to memorize the features as clear as possible, and then to improve their performance. So that's the plan for the training.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers.
Okay. Then we go to the next opponent, and that is Dr. Jamal Monzul, and she is also professor of law and psychology at the University of Lethbridge, all the way in California. Welcome.
Canada. Well, not quite California, but Canada anyway. Excuse me. Yes, yes. Thank you. Dear candidate, it was an absolute pleasure to read your dissertation. I was very pleased to see somebody taking up the mantle and really looking into this issue of face coverings, not just masks, but even though masks are really important, especially at the time you started your dissertation, but also because it's clear, even from the images you presented today, that criminals know that covering their face can help them get away with their crimes. So it was a real pleasure to see the systematic way that you examined these questions with an eye towards how we can improve practice in order to facilitate criminal justice. And I really enjoyed that. My question is going to be about the confidence accuracy relationship, because of course, if we're going to use identifications from of individuals who were masked, one of the ways that we evaluate whether or not an identification is reliable is from the individual's confidence in that identification, whether it's a recognition or face matching. And it was very interesting to learn that there is really no literature on the confidence accuracy relationship in relation to face matching. So kudos to you for taking up that mantle. I'd like to ask I'd like to hear you speculate about why you only found a positive confidence accuracy relationship in a few cases. Specifically, experiment 5 in all conditions except the masked full condition, and then only in the full masked condition in experiment 7. And I'd like to hear you comment about both how this this sort of tendency not to find a confidence accuracy relationship relates to both your method in terms of how you conducted the experiments, as well as the connection between your methodology and the real world conditions, and of course, masking itself.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I really have some thoughts about the confidence and accuracy relationship. The reason why we did not find the confidence and accuracy relationship in experiment 5 and experiment 7, the reason I can just give give some reasons, explanations based on such, for example, for the first one is because the task is difficult, task difficulty. Because for the experiment 5, let me check. For the experiment 5, because although we just reducing the memory load, we still we found the confidence and accuracy relationship in experiment 5, right? And in experiment 7, though we just reduced the memory load, but we did not find the confidence and accuracy relationship. The difference between these two experiments, the first thing is that the task difficulty. For the experiment 5, we used it in the controlled condition, that the face was recognized in the controlled condition was clear face, not in the real life condition. However, in experiment 7, like the face was shown in the different angle or some like the different viewpoint, and also for the realistic unstrained conditions, this task difference make it can be different. And also, this absence of the confidence and accuracy relationship can be explained by the optimality hypothesis, because it suggests that the confidence and accuracy relationship can become weaker if the encoding condition is not optimal for them to encode. So in such condition, we also provide the suggestion that the confidence may not serve as a reliable indicator in mask face recognition, because in mask face recognition, the face are disrupted by the mask, and people cannot to encode them so well for them to encode. So that may explain why the confidence and accuracy relationship was not found in our study. I think this just to explain.
Okay, so to follow up, it's actually surprising that you don't find the confidence accuracy relationship, because it's a very consistent finding across the eyewitness identification literature. And the extant support is not so much for the optimality hypothesis. There is certainly support for that, but there's also considerable support for the likelihood ratio model, which suggests that people adjust their confidence because they recognize that that their viewing conditions aren't very good. And it seems to me that viewing conditions in the real world are going to be less optimal than what you have had in your experiment. So this is one of the reasons why I find it really surprising that you didn't find the confidence accuracy relationship. So maybe if you could speak to that just for a few minutes.
Sorry, could you just to repeat the question again? Maybe I don't understand your question correctly.
Of course, sorry. So there's two theories, the optimality hypothesis and the likelihood ratio model. And your results are consistent with the optimality hypothesis, but recent results in the eyewitness memory literature are consistent with the likelihood ratio model, which states that people adjust their confidence to match the conditions of encoding. And therefore, you find a strong confidence accuracy relationship. So the majority of the recognition literature finds a strong confidence accuracy relationship, but you haven't. And so I would like to hear you discuss why that might be beyond the optimality hypothesis. How do you reconcile that the conditions of your studies were actually probably better than the conditions in typical eyewitness studies where there is, mock crime videos with quite poor views.
Here I need to explain that our study is not the only one study that did not find the confidence and accuracy relationship. Like the Palu, their study, they also use the mask face eyewitness identification. They also did not find the confidence and the accuracy relationship, no matter when the face are shown in recording and at retrieval or at both. The confidence and the accuracy relationship did not happen in their study. And I answer your question about the likelihood that this hypothesis that the participants can adjust their confidence based on their adjustment. This is just based on the metacognition, but in our study, because the task difficulty is different, and maybe participants will underestimate their performance and they will rate their confidence so low. So that makes not to make the confidence can track the accuracy well in our study. So I think it's also because of the task difficulty and the participants' metacognition that they did not think they are really good at in recognizing their study. And these results can also be found to compared with in experiment 1 and experiment 2, because I just compared make the participant to compare with the mouth and the eyes. And we found that participants just to underestimate their performance when they just to matching the mouth, not in eyes. So maybe it's just about the participants, they underestimate their performance. So that makes the absence, confidence, and accuracy relationship in our study.
Are you satisfied with the answers?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Then we will proceed with the last opponent, also member of the assessment committee, and that is Professor Muraba. And he is a professor of applied cognitive psychology.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear candidate, first of all, my compliments for this brilliant thesis. It's excellent. It's an excellent thesis. It's well written, lots of experiments, well carried out experiments. You are a very skilled experimentator, sophisticated analysis, statistical analysis, and it's wonderful to read. So I enjoyed reading this thesis. So my compliments to you and to the supervisors. I have a promise and I have a question for you. The promise is related to proposition number 10, where you say, time spent with cats is never wasted. And you attribute this quote to Sigmund Freud. And I think that is a misquotation. If you are able to show me where he says this, you get, and that's my promise, a big bottle of champagne. And we have here all the witnesses, so you will deserve a big bottle of champagne if you can show me where he says this. So that is my promise to you. My question to you is related to chapter 3, where you use the Cambridge face recognition test as a measure for individual differences. And where you compare the people who perform very high, who are very well recognizing faces, and the people who score very low. And what you conclude is that the people who score very high should not be overestimated. That is your message to the police and to law enforcement. Don't overestimate these people. It's not the case that they are excellent in this congruency thing. And now, how does that relate to the whole literature on super recognizers? What is your stance on that? What is your idea about that? Because there they say you should take into account individual differences.
Yeah. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. First, I need to answer your first question about the quotation. The reason why I just use it, I'm not sure if it's really from the simulated field, because I searched it only to relate it to the cat. in Google, and I found, because I have a cat, I want to cite one that's related to the cat. So I just searched in Google, and they told me that this is the person who just said that. So I wrote it down. So I'm not sure if it's right or not. If it's wrong, I think Google just lied to me. So that's the reason. Yeah. And
there the champagne goes already.
yeah, and another question is about the individual difference in chapter 3. In this chapter, I use the Cambridge face memory test, and in this task, it's just to because the many literatures, many studies, they just used it to explore the individual differences in face memory task. We also used it, and it can provide us two comparable results, can compare with any other studies if the individual difference can truly to be high or they have the different performance. But I need to answer is that I think your point is about why the high ability performers, they can not to be high in across all conditions. Yeah, I need to say that this finding is not the first time in our study, because the previous, like the Noyes and the book, they also found that the high ability performers, they cannot to perform always better than in any other condition, especially in mask face recognition. But in our study, I can see that the high ability performers, they performed better than in low ability performers. And it's based because that high ability performers, they can just too flexible, use the face processing strategies. For example, if they just say a mask face, maybe they can just to use the holistic processing, just transfer to the feature-based processing. That makes them too flexible to transfer to the better way to recognize a mask target. And in our study, we didn't to use the terms of the super recognizer in our study because we use the high ability performers to describe it. The reason why we did not use the super recognizer is because in CFT tests, most of them, they will use the two standard deviation, like or above the average. But in our study, we only use the top 5% or top 25%, not to use like the two standard deviation. The reason why we didn't use it, because we want to know that the broader, like the group for the higher performers, they will have the difference pattern with the lower performers pattern. But we didn't want to focus on the super recognizers, so that's the reason. And also because the previous studies, like one study, I think the name is. Give me 1 second. I forgot his name, sorry. Yeah. But in his study, he also used the top 5% and to do the individual difference also in multi-face recognition. But they use for the face matching task, not the recognition task. So we want to compare with the different patterns with matching and recognition. So we just to use their method to use the top 5% and not to use the two standard derivation like the super recognizers. And because we aim to explore whether they have like the different performance just between the high ability, between the congruency effect between the high ability performers and the low ability performers. So we just to use this method.
I find this a very convincing answer. We're back to the chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a little bit time left, and that means that we're going into a second round. And that will be Professor Verel. Do you want to ask an additional question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I also alluded in the beginning to the ecological validity, and this term has been used by various opponents now, the ecological validity of your studies. So how realistic were the conditions of your experiments? For a thesis that claims to fill the gap in the literature on how well humans perform in identifying masked faces in real-world settings, the ecological validity of the experiments is rather low, with student samples, online participation, use of face recognition paradigms instead of lineups, and the use of black boxes as masks. A notable exception is chapter 5, in which at least the to-be-remembered stimuli were more realistic, and the participants were more representative of the general setting. But I would like you to reflect on how the use of students in most experiments, the online participation, the use of black boxes, and the choice for a face recognition paradigm may have impacted the findings. And specifically, I'd like you to focus on the fact that in real life, witnesses would usually be shown a lineup. So the person would be shown alongside other people, like in your picture on your book. And how do you think, if you had used a lineup paradigm instead of this face recognition yes, no task, how would that have impacted your findings?
I think your question have two. One is about the ecological for like the student samples, if they are reliable, right? And another question is about the difference between the line of study and our study.
Well, it's all about the ecological validity in a sense. So how much is it realistic to how you have done it compared to what it would happen to witnesses in the real world?
In our study, we choose the face matching and the recognition task is because it's easy for us to control the procedure, because we can just control how the covering size and also for the part of the occlusion for people to recognize. And also why we didn't choose the line-up study, because previous study they have already did for in line-up study, like my supervisor and also the Mengying, they already used the line-up study for the mask face recognition. And we just want to provide a new way just for the realistic scenarios, such like the passport controller. They will just to matching the real identity with the faces on the screen. So it's truly based on the realistic application, not to focus on like the academic, not without any practical. So that's the reason why we choose the face matching and face recognition. For the ecological thing, we asked the student sample. It is because that we recruit the participant online, and most of them just recruit it on Sona system, and it's that most the college students they join in our study. So that's about why we just to choose the students as our main sample. And also they have studies that show that student sample is as good as the uncontrolled professionals' performance. So I think our just results for the student sample can also be reliable for their results to exploring the congruency effect in mask face matching and face recognition performance.
Okay. If I can have a small follow-up to that, or do you want to move on?
Yeah.
So for the lineups, you say that previous work by supervisors has done lineup studies for this for this effect, for masked faces. So can you elaborate a little bit on how what they found and how the contextual congruency would apply to lineups?
For example, in my supervisor's lab study, they use also with the partial face. When they first they just encoding the mask face with like winger in height or some like the mask thing, covering thing, and then they just saw the partial face, and they found that just to present it with the partial face rather than the full face can also benefit people to recognize them in line-up studies. So that is the reason. That is also the similar explanation in the congruency effect, because they didn't mention congruency effect, but the same, just like the encoding and the perceiving the stage are the same, because they just say the same with the mask face and also the partial face, similar as what we have done. So I think it's also a part of the congruency effect in lab study, and they also found the partial face is the advantage for them to recognize. So that's their finding, most interesting finding.
Hora est.
Mengying Zhang. The time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request you and your company to leave the room, and after the deliberation of the committee, the beadle will come and collect you and bring you back to the room. Okay?
Please.
Thank you, Professor Verel, for saving the furniture. No, but she was talkative, but yeah.
Yeah, I saw that was 1 minute.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. Okay, so now we will have a brief round, and you can tell me a little bit about what you thought of the thesis, the quality of the thesis, but also the quality of the defense. And we start with the chair of the assessment committee, Professor Utka. What do you think of the thesis and your defense? What is your opinion?
Yeah, well, I'm very happy with the thesis. I think many have already said it in their opening of their questions, that it contains really an interesting mix of well-executed experiments. Certainly applaud the supervisor also for this, because these are not easy type of studies, also very well analyzed. So, no, in terms of thesis, I think it's well done. And of course, I mean, I've heard also from you, too bad that she sometimes was unlucky
assess the quality of your thesis and your defense. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Sauerland is now authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with the Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor now to take the floor.
Please all rise. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Mengying Zhang, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Thank you.
Please be seated.
The degree can go to the company. Thank you.
Okay, and the Laudatio will be done by Professor Sayana.
Dear Dr. Zhang, I get to call you that now. Dear colleagues, dear friends and family. Today, we are here to celebrate not just the completion of your PhD, but a truly remarkable journey. A journey that began 4 years ago when you left your home country. You made this courageous decision to travel all the way from China to here and follow a PhD in the Netherlands, supported by a prestigious scholarship by the Chinese Scholarship Council. And from the start, you faced challenges far beyond academic ones. The first one, of course, is this eternal struggle of hearing your names pronounced right. You've heard it being called Mengying, Mengying, Mengying sometimes. We tried, we really did, dear colleagues, but let's be honest, we never really got the tones right. I believe it is Mengying. Yes. Last year. Now, moving countries is never easy. New language, new culture, new bureaucracy. But Mengying decided to put an extra challenge to the bid. She traveled while there was a global pandemic ongoing. While the rest of us were still trying to figure out how not to reveal our drying underpants on Zoom meetings, and we were maybe experimenting with sourdoughs, Mengying was navigating international travel bans, extra vaccinations at the time, and enough paperwork to make even a Greek blush. And yet, you arrived here, calm, determined, and ready to start your studies. Yet another challenge. I must confess, my own timing was, let's say, suboptimal. You were adjusting in a new life in academia, and I was beginning my maternity leave on my firstborn. Yeah, quite an unfortunate beginning, but despite this unusual beginning, or maybe perhaps because of it, you showed from the start a strength, a resilience, and a positivity that came to define your work here at Maastricht University. It was this resilience that was tested again and again when we tried to publish our first paper. That one, that is now published. Academic life is never smooth sailing, and of course, we shared our enough storms, I would say. Desk rejection after desk rejection would have discouraged many, but you, Mengying, met each setback with a humor and perseverance. And today, said that paper is proudly published, as are other ones of your book, in prestigious journals like Memory and Cognition. This is a hard-earned victory and a proof that resistance and hard work does pay off. Mengying, you also brought a lot of joy to our group and to me personally. You have witnessed a little bit her sense of humor during this defense. Your humor, always dry, sharp, always kept me smiling. I laugh every time I remember when I ask you about your beloved cat, Mino. I asked her a while back, how's Mino? Still fat.
Mino is my cat.
No explanation needed, right? Your positive outlook and your humor have brightened every challenge that we had and even the hardest meetings that we had together. You have also shown remarkable adaptability to Dutch culture, and I suspect that some aspects were a bit more memorable than others. For example, I remember your original journey from Amsterdam to Maastricht, which certainly provides some unexpected cultural encounters in the train that perhaps we maybe don't need to elaborate. I think some members of the audience remember. Let's just say that Mengying learned Dutch public transportation can offer some diverse experience with its passengers and their behavior. Looking back at your journey, now that we have reached the end, I can say that what impressed me right from the beginning was your curiosity and knowledge of literature. Even in our very first Zoom meeting, I still remember that one, before we even decided that we will work together, I could already see your enthusiasm for research and your passion for experimental studies. Over the 4 years that we spent together, I've seen you grow into a confident, thoughtful, and capable scholar who never loses sight of the bigger picture. Your PhD work on masked perpetrator was undoubtedly influential in the field. It has already made real contributions to science with implications for the courtroom, the law enforcement, and for our own understanding of how humans recognize, or better, misrecognize others. Mengying, as you embark into the next chapter of your career, please take with you not only the well-earned doctorate that you got today, but also our deepest respect and affection. We know you will continue to do amazing things with the same intelligence, kindness, and humor that you put into this work. On behalf of all of us, congratulations, Dr. Zhang.
Thank you, Anna.
Dear Dr. Zhang, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree that you have acquired, and I herewith close this academics.
Okay, I would like to ask the audience, except the photographer and videographer, to already leave and go to the museum for the reception. So the online will take a picture with you in it, okay?
So you should hold the degree, I think.
Well, it's an